Welcome to Law and Justice. I'm Jane Mulcahy, and today I am joined by Dr. Rob Worrall. I am really excited. Hi, Rob. How are you?
I'm good, Jane. How are you?
I'm very well, very well. So, Rob, I normally ask everyone to just tell me a bit about themselves and their background. So maybe we can kick off with that, please. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Okay. So my name's Rob. I suppose in short, I've spent a lot of my career working in collaboration with people. So I did a lot of work working in the public service, developing, and the private sector, developing collaborations at different levels, at local level, regional level, national level, and international level. And this brought me into contact with a lot of interesting people, and also it kind of really sparked my curiosity for what works in terms of collaboration. And a number of years ago, I ended up, after quite a long career in the public service, I ended up working for the National School of Government, which was based in the south of England in the UK. And I worked in leadership and strategy division. And within that, there was a really strong interest in how can we make more effective leaders? How can we help leaders collaborate at across agencies? Or this was more across the civil service, but there was a recognition that civil servants were being trained in like silos. And then the police were trained in silos, and then the social workers were trained in silos. And there was a realization that there wasn't really effective collaboration across government. And at the time, there was a real strong interest in well, all this money being spent at the local level, is it being spent efficiently? Is it being spent effectively? And there was an initiative called Counting Cumbria, which happened in the late noughties, and they looked at how money was spent locally, and they realized that actually in a lot of cases there was duplication of services, there was lack of coordination, and people weren't being supported in the best way possible by public services. So there was an efficiency element and an effectiveness element, and the Labour government at the time had an interest in like develop more place-based approaches. Because there was also a realization, which I found out later from my research, that a lot of money had been spent locally on regeneration projects where it was all about bricks and mortar, but things like, but outcomes hadn't really improved for people living there. Okay. And there was a realization that it was really important actually to think about how we worked with people and residences, but also think about how local and national agencies and in the community, and also non-profits and people in the community development sector and their organizations, how they work together. So I had done a lot of work in local government, so I was really interested in, well, actually, what is a place-based approach? What is effective place-based leadership? And that's really where my, I suppose, my expertise and my passion lies. So now, fast forward to I don't know, since 2018, I've been working in Ireland, and during that time, I've worked across with a lot of public sector organisations. I also currently work with organisations like the Royal College of Surgeons of Ireland on digital health transformation. I work with Warwick University on a talent development program for minority senior leaders in academics and senior leaders in higher education. But I suppose my passion is really what I call place-based leadership development. And
what is that, Rob?
So place-based leadership development is an umbrella term for finding ways for enabling leaders to work more effectively together to improve outcomes for local communities. And in terms of it being place-based, it's because it's about organizations within a recognized geographical area. That could be a neighborhood, it could be a county, it could be a city, or it could be an estate. In my case, in 2009, I developed one of the first cross public and not-for-profit sector conferences in London with the National School of Government, but with a number of other agencies as well. And I was really interested in thinking about where are there initiatives that are working that are not necessarily led by the state, but maybe led by community organisations or not-for-profit organisations, but were collaborative. And from that, we had a really interesting conference, and I really then kind of refocused my research totally. So at the time, I was doing a doctorate on diversity and organizational performance in the fire and rescue services, because previously I'd been a national advisor to the modernization of fire and rescue services, and I was invited to do a PhD by Anglia Ruskin University. But I kind of had a road to Damascus moment and realized that I didn't want to carry on that research, and I persuaded my the university to allow me to start my research again. And initially I was going to do it. I was going to look at a cross civil service leadership program, but actually in the end I thought no, I really wanted to look at something which was more place-based. And through my contacts with the conference in 2009, I developed a number of connections, and I managed to get access to 3 place-based initiatives, and they really formed the basis of my research.
Okay, excellent. Well, just to take a breath there a second, because the topic of this specific Law and Justice podcast is relationships matter. And it's very interesting from what you've said, you know, both with your civil service, public service background, and then your movement into the more place-based local initiatives, that relationships seem absolutely key to that, you know, fostering safety and collaboration and listening to one another to have more productive, I guess, problem solving or solutions at local level. Would that be fair, Rob?
Yeah, totally, Jane, totally. You know, leadership for me is a social process. Okay, this is borrowed from a publication by Isles and Priest, who looked at collaborative leadership in the Northeast, and I think in the Northeast. Basically, for me, there's leadership and developing leaders is about the intrapersonal, developing the self from the inside out. But then it's also about the leadership is about how we work with other people. So we create leadership it's a social process. We create leadership in how we interact with others. So we create leadership working with and through other people. What this means is that in order to be effective, we need to develop really good interpersonal skills. And for me, I really feel that in that sense, it starts with understanding other people's perspectives, and it starts with our mindset. So for me, effective leadership is a state of mind, and it's about how we invest in our relationships. And at a place-based level, that's quite complex, because we're getting people to look at how they relate to themselves, their own strengths and their own weaknesses, or areas for development, how they relate to people within their organization, but also how they relate to people within the wider sector, and also across place. And of course, within that, it's how we work with others and work with communities and work with people in communities. You know, it's very much relational leadership in that sense. Very much about how I arrive, but it's also how I connect and interconnect. And there was some research done in that, I think it was in 2011, there was some research done, and it was called Resourceful Leadership, the term that the researchers came up with. I think it was done by Oxford University and some consultants, I can't remember the name. But basically, it looked at why some children's services directors survived and thrived, and why others didn't. And at the time, being a director of children's services was one of the most difficult and challenging positions in local government in the UK.
No doubt.
Yeah, because there'd been a number of issues, and
the stakes are very high.
Yeah, and there'd been a number of child deaths. And while they were supposed to be looked at, or at least be monitored by people from social service, for example. And they were kind of looking, this research was saying like, well, why do some people survive and other people don't crash and burn? And one of the things that they identified was these resourceful leaders spent more time developing really good relationships, both within their organization and across the wider sector or the wider system.
Right.
So the resourceful element is they could call on those resources when they had a challenge, or they needed more information, or they wanted to bring people together. So for me, that is also another example of relational leadership.
Sure.
The same with the more recent models of leadership around distributed leadership, shared leadership. Again, it's about how we are. But I try to emphasize, though, that it's not just about how we are with people. It's about, first of all, how you are with yourself.
Right.
And it's about your mindset and how you are with yourself. And a higher level of self-awareness also creates a higher level of confidence.
Yeah.
And we know from other research as well that things which are important in terms of, relationships is your mindset.
Sure.
Are you open to working in different ways with people, or to understanding different perspectives?
Yeah.
We know that's really important. So in that sense, relational leadership is key, is core. In my PhD, I developed a model which, from the literature, suggested there were probably 7 stages to developing effective intersectoral leaders. And by that, I simply mean leaders who are able to work with other agencies effectively to affect change across a locality, across a place. But when I actually went to the different places and I interviewed, 3 categories of people: program directors, program facilitators, and participants. But 80%, 90% of these people were participants. And I looked at what their lived experience was, and what came out was there were a number of the original model I had about the stages to developing effective intersectoral, place-based intersectoral leaders, that did ring true. But laying across that was also a series of tensions.
Okay.
And one of those tensions was kind of in terms of how much you focus just on yourself and what you want to achieve, and how much you think about the greater good, and how you work across place and connect with people. And I termed that the rehumanization of place.
Okay, nice.
And that term, rehumanization obviously has roots in academic literature and research. But so I drew on that. But in my context, this was actually about connecting as a person and with people first, and seeing the person, not the title, not the job. I mean, and
I love that.
Yeah. So this is kind of really important. And in the place-based approach, we start there. We start with where people are. I have a number of ways of designing programs, which kind of people sometimes think are idiosyncratic, but actually they're part of a practice that I've been developing, I suppose, since about 2010, 11. And some of these is about how people arrive in the room and how we connect, first of all. So in place-based leadership development, and I think that's important as well, that what we're talking about here is place-based leadership development. So
yes.
It's not just about place-based leadership. It's not about identifying a place and saying there's good leadership there, oh, that's place-based leadership. This is more about helping people work together to address issues, but at the same time, they're developing themselves. So one of the things we do is we make sure when people come in the room, that name cards are already out on the tables, and they will be intersectoral groups. So there will be people from the Garda, in the Irish context, the Garda, government departments that have local responsibilities, such as TUSLA. There'll also be people from the lead organization might be part of the program, people from the community, and residents stroke community leaders will also be part of these groups. So they work very much in pairs, in dyads and in groups. But the important thing is we get people to connect, first of all, at a very human level. We get people to understand that, because we get people to understand that, yes, that might be a guardie, female guard in front of me, but actually she could also be a wife and a mother and a sister. And as a mother, she also wants the best for her children in the local area. She also wants, a safe neighborhood. She also wants more opportunities. So in that sense, we're getting people to see that at the outset, we're human, and it's about relationships. It's about how we work. So some of the stuff some of the work we do initially is very much at this level. And we know from this work, I'm not giving you chance to get a question in.
It's okay.
But we know from this work that it's massively important that the way we work with each other is really, really crucial.
Yeah.
So things as well like rules of engagement are really important. We get groups to develop their own rules of engagement when they're working with each other on a place-based leadership development program. And we get them to check in with those rules of engagement when they come to a new session. So
how are we measuring up?
How are we measuring? And also it's kind of about self-regulation. So how do we do that? We do an activity around how would you like to work together. The groups produce a rules of engagement kind of charter. And sometimes, and we link that to behaviors. Okay.
Yes.
So values and behaviors. So very much we're saying, if these are the values that you want, what are the behaviors that would identify or demonstrate that these values are being followed? And if they're saying inclusiveness, we get people to think about, well, what would the inclusiveness be like? It could be like, well, Jane's quite shy, so I'm going to make sure that I pull her into the conversation, into the discussion. I make sure that she gets a chance to give her perspective, and we listen to her, and not just the loudest voices in the group.
Yes.
So what we do, for example, is when the groups produce things like hopes, fears, concerns, we document them. And when we give people access to the slides at the end of the session, a few days later, we include all that they produce in the slides.
That's nice.
So this means that the groups have a point of reference, that they can check in with themselves. And we say it's a dynamic and evolving process. What we find there is groups start to self-regulate, start to develop an identity. How do we test this out? One way is we say to the group, well, by the next session, we want you to have a name for the group, but we want you to find a way of connecting with each other to agree that name. And we want you all to come up with a name potentially, and then you agree the name. And we're going to talk about that process next time. So
and why is that naming important? Is it about the group identity?
It's about the group identity, but it's also about the process.
Okay.
So it's about the process of coming up with the name.
Okay.
So the process builds connection, builds relationships. And one of the ways people might do that is through WhatsApp. But when they're connecting through WhatsApp as well, they also should be observing their what I call rules of engagement, which is shorthand for how do we want to work together? How do we want to work? And this encourages self-regulation. It also encourages identity. It encourages the development of a safe space. So we know from I've been doing in terms of place-based leadership development, I've been doing it in practice, I suppose, since about 2015.
Okay.
Initially, I did a bit of initial work to test out some of my ideas that had come from my research. I did some work in Sunderland, in the northeast of England. And as I said, my research was based on 3 different collaboratives, all from different places, all very different. In the research, they're called, A, B, and C, but sorry to say, one of the places is Suffolk. One of the places was Suffolk in the southeast of England. One of the places was Worcestershire. And one of the places was Leicestershire. All very different places.
Okay.
Leicestershire was kind of quite interesting because it had like a Labour city, inner city, Labour run local authority with a conservative, more prosperous county council area run by Conservatives. So very Labour-led mayor, very strong, wanting to change things, very different. And then Suffolk the same, a lot of prosperity, but some real strong areas of deprivation, and Worcestershire the same.
Okay.
And in Worcestershire, politicians were included, like local and national politicians. In Leicestershire, it was more emerging leaders, especially the police, local government, health, and in Suffolk, it was a mix, but there were also some business representatives. Whereas in Worcestershire, there were actually business people as well, like managing directors of some local companies. So what happened though, which is kind of, I suppose, amazingly, when I finished the thesis in 2015, that Christmas I had the first day off. I had the first Christmas off that I'd had for 5 years.
I know those kind of Christmases.
Yeah. And I found myself in Kenya, of all places, the following January, I think it was 2016, because I was working for a business school at the time, Sunderland University Business School, and I was doing some work with one of our local partner organizations on leadership, developing a leadership symposium, designing and delivering a leadership symposium for small businesses in Nairobi.
Can you just move your mic slightly? You're dipping in and out.
Is that better?
That's better, thank you.
Yeah, so I just telling you this story because one day I was in a swimming pool, and I was swimming up and down, and I could hear a man from Kenya asking a guy from, it was a European guy, a guy from Europe, what are you doing in our country? And the guy from Kenya, his name happened to be Robert as well. And I'm just listening, and I suppose you could call me curious or you could call me nosy. And I could hear, it was only a small pool, so I could hear the response was from the guy, turned out to be called Finn. He was from Denmark, and his response was, "Oh, I'm over here trying to develop a transformational leadership program for people trying to work together to reduce urban violence." And I was thinking, that's place-based.
Yeah.
There's a systemic challenge, which is urban violence, which I don't know a lot about.
Yeah.
But actually, it's just a place-based. He's looking to get a place-based approach. So I kind of just went over to him and said, "Excuse me, I couldn't help."
Just your relationship skills.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And cut a very long story short, following September, I ended up in Kenya delivering a place-based pilot 2-day workshop with about 25 leaders from different sectors in a place called Nakuru. And from there evolved I started working with another place. Another place in Nakuru is a county, but it's also the capital city of the county. And then shouldn't say the capital, because the people from Naivasha, the other place I'm working with, might beg to differ about. But I ended up working with the local partner organization, Midwest Human Rights Network, and these Denmark, the organization, Finn's organization from Denmark, called the Danish Institute Against
Dignity.
It's Dignity. Danish Institute Against Torture, sorry. But they also do a lot of work on trying to prevent and reduce violence happening in the first place in urban areas. So I ended up working with Finn and the local partner organization, Midwest Human Rights Network, working with leaders from across different sectors to look at how leadership development could help them reduce urban violence. And it was a pilot and an experiment, but it ended up being a core part of their wider urban violence prevention program. All that is to say, we now know from the research that we've done that there are a number of behaviors, or what I call tenets of practice, which are really important
Okay.
in terms of how we work together if we want effective place-based leadership development. And they are very, very relational.
Yeah. Well, I'll let you tell me them now in a second, but I just want to say I love that story because one, it shows the value of keeping your ears open and not being, too embarrassed to seize the potential opportunity. And that what's the worst that can happen by making the connection? I mean, that a wonderful program and a wonderful win-win situation arose for Finn and yourself and Robert and the wider community. So it's a really cool example of just make the connection.
Yeah,
Just
totally.
make the connection, relate to people. And
yeah. I think it's really important that I think this notion of serendipity I think is important, but I also think it's the notion of take the opportunity. And for me, I think what's I suppose the profound impact that's had on me is in terms of my work now and my practice. So I run my own business, but I'm also an adjunct faculty, and I feel very strongly that it's really important that my relationships are strong and right. And I choose a lot of my work, a lot of the associates I work with, we have great relationships. And if that didn't work, it wouldn't work in the classroom or the workshop.
Sure.
Or it doesn't work when you're working together. If the relationship isn't right, if there isn't a deep level of trust, then I tend not to continue working with those people. So, and I'm fortunate that I can choose that, but I tend to find it's massively important because on a place-based leadership program, for example, the Kenyan program was over 3 years. What's fantastic is that I ran a couple of workshops in Ireland, and this led to what is now place-based leadership development programs happening in Darndale in Dublin and Drogheda in County Louth. And this has been like a real journey. I suppose a 3-year journey from the very first open workshop I did for the Institute of Public Administration back in Tullamore in 2018. And again, that was what happened there was I connected very strongly with somebody from the DRCD, the Department for Rural and Community Development. And that's kind of how things developed. And then someone approached me. And so I feel like I very much practice. I need to practice what I preach.
Yeah.
But also in the Kenyan context, so the tenets of practice, there are 8, which I'm not going to go through them all, but they're things like working with and not to people.
Yeah.
This is about development, not training.
Yeah.
So this puts more onus on this.
More co-production as well.
Yeah, more co-production and more onus as me as an individual to actually work on myself.
Okay.
So it's not like it's not a passive program. It's a very active and engaged program. It's about creating a safe space is another tenet. Another one is bearing witness. So
okay, what do you mean by that?
By that I mean that what struck me was in the case studies I looked at, sometimes they would bring in people who are vulnerable or to talk about their experiences of, for example, mental health. In one case, it was mental health and how they've been let down by the mental health service in this particular locality. And what the leaders did was they sat there and they were told, if you can, just listen. And so what they did was they learned how to sit there and listen for 20-25 minutes while these young people talked about their experience, their lived experience. And what was unusual for these senior leaders was they were very much used to talking.
Yeah.
They were very much used to getting their case, talking, getting things across, and telling people how they saw things and how things were going to be. Another example which struck me was Some senior leaders were taken to an area of considerable disadvantage. They were taken there in the early morning, and they were just said, "We just want you to walk around the area."
I love it.
So they walked around the area, and then they were taken into a community centre, given a cup of tea, and sat down and talked to local residents. And very much, and that is very much important, because actually what I try and do in my practice, and what I'm asking participants to do, is to make sure that when we work with people, we are parking our attitudes at the door, or our assumptions, parking our assumptions at the door, having an open attitude, listening, being with people the whole time. So that's psychological. Presence. And then, so that's the B, we call it the ABC of presence, actually. And then C is communication. So, but I kind of use the, I always say it's about active listening, and it's seek to understand and then be understood. So it's the opposite way around. In my experience, it's the opposite way around that we're taught. When we go into agency meetings, traditionally, it's like, well, the organization's point of view is this, and I have to try and get the organization's point of view across. So what you'll hear sometimes in meetings is, I hear what you're saying, but so what that actually means to me is, I haven't listened to you. I've kind of heard, but actually the reason that can't happen is because of this. So that's all very well, Jane, but I hear what you're saying, but
can't happen.
Yeah, it can't happen. So I'm too busy trying to get my point across. So we do a lot of work with people, getting them to think and reflect on how they interact, and these practices, we've written them up. We've developed, basically in the Kenyan program, we're now developing some of the people from, we were concerned with, the Kenyan program was evaluated as an independent in-depth evaluation. It identified a number of initiatives that happened because of the relationships built up over the time of the program. And we were concerned. So what we were concerned of in the Kenyan program, because we were kind of knew it was relational, about trust building. So what we were concerned about from the outset was, a lot of leadership development programs don't measure impact across the life of the program. So what happens is, we kind of don't know, we can't really infer, or we've no evidence that what the impact of the program has been. So for the Kenyan program, we developed, so the modules, the program was normally done in 2-day blocks. And what we would do is we would design a questionnaire, a pre-joining questionnaire, at the end of day 1 and a questionnaire at the end of day 2. And we designed in time for people to complete these questionnaires. So we had a lot of data, but more importantly, the questionnaires helped people reflect on their experience and their learning. So instead of just, at the end of the day on some leadership programs, right now, reflect and write down your learning points. What we got people to do, we got people to reflect and come back to each other and reflect, and what we found, what we did to evaluate the program was, we were thinking, well, actually, what's happened across place? So we've worked with all these leaders, so what difference has it made? So what we did was, we got people, we interviewed I didn't lead the research, I kind of stepped aside. The research team took 6 people from Naivasha and 7 people from Nakuru, or it might be the other way around, and each of these people were from different sectors, and we asked them who they worked with within the system across the place. So they identified 2 collaborators that they worked with. So we interviewed the participants, and then we interviewed their collaborators. And this enabled us to kind of
compare and contrast
and say, well, have they really made a difference? Because we were interested to know if the program had impacted on them, what impact it had on their sector and the people they work with, but also what initiatives came out of it. Was there any evidence? And there was a lot of evidence, and there was.
That's great.
We had some anecdotal evidence. So what where we're at now is in the Kenyan context, we've actually developed a co-facilitator development program.
Cool.
So we're getting people to, and what
Local
we mean,
people, is it?
local people from the participants who have been on the program, but also younger people who are emerging leaders within the place where they live.
Super.
And what we're trying to do is create sustainability, and also make sure that it's not just about, you know, people in their 40s or 50s, people my age, and wish I was still in my 40s, people my age, but also that people, young and emerging leaders, are coming up. So at the moment we've got and we've extended it to two more places. So Naivasha and Nakuru are the two, and then Njoro, which is a province, which is a place just kind of neighboring Nakuru, and Nakuru city municipality. And then there's a place called Baringo, which is in the north of Kenya, which is very different. It's a rural area, and some of the issues there are around cattle rustling, intertribal violence, female genital mutilation, those sort of things. So very much a different area, but we've brought people in from Baringo and Njoro and these other places, and we're helping them. We're getting them to work together to deliver parts of the program, and then they're reviewed by people, by their peers. So we're getting the people. So we're getting the co-facilitators to work together. So again, it's relationships. So
and also, I suppose there's only one of you, Rob, so you can't be everywhere.
No, I certainly can't. I certainly can't. And what we're doing now is making sure we're kind of in Nakuru and Naivasha. We kind of feel like we're kind of experimenting with creating more of a movement. So creating agents for social change across these localities, across these municipalities. At the moment, we've had one cohort of we delivered the program to one cohort of co-facilitators who are already out there delivering the 10-module program of place-based leadership development. And what was really interesting as well was initially when we did the pilot workshops. But when we initially had the idea was, oh yeah, well, you'll go to 1 week in one place and deliver the program, and you'll go to 1 week in another place and deliver the program. And it would have been a disaster, because what people actually need is more time to absorb and to connect. So instead of doing that, we had to do, what's that trendy word? Pivot. Remember that word? So we had to pivot. Be
agile.
Be agile. And so what we did was we created a program which involved pre-activities, live workshops, and post-workshop activities. We brought in leadership experts on place and relationship building and trust building to do podcasts. And we also got people to do reflective practice and other activities. And what we did was so the participants would met in workshops in Kenya, in a venue in Kenya. They worked in tables and in pairs. They had a facilitator in the room, and then on the table, on each table group. Then they had a facilitator in the room who ran the whole thing, and then they had me appearing via Zoom.
Okay,
so quite a complex setup, but it seems to have worked really well.
That's great.
And yeah, we're actually I think we're very passionate and impassioned by it, and again, Jane, the key point back to what you're saying, it's the relationships that's really important.
And the creating, I mean, what I'm hearing from you peppered throughout is safety, trust.
Totally,
And the connecting at a kind of heart-to-heart level, regardless of what your background is or your status level.
Totally. Creating a safe space is another tenet of practice. So we have tenets of practice, which are 8, and then we have a number of foundational principles, including rehumanization of place, which I mentioned earlier. But then it's also things like leader and leadership development. It's also creating respect, trust. How do we do that?
We also spend a lot of time on skills development.
Sure.
So in terms of program design, we focus on developing people's mindsets. We focus on skills. So skills is things like emotional intelligence, developing your emotional intelligence.
So
It's also,
important.
yeah, it's also things like managing conflict,
yeah,
and responding to conflict in different ways, knowing what your triggers are. So we do a lot of work on
and
the
many
dynamic.
of us are clueless about what our triggers are.
Totally. Yeah,
You know?
totally. Yeah, I know for me, if someone sends me an email, that annoys me. One of my triggers, if someone's rude in an email, I might just write back. Oh. So I don't now. I step back. I've learned to step back.
Breathe.
I've learned to breathe and take perspective and answer that email tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
Put a bit of space between
yeah,
it.
exactly. And we very much work with these areas to help people develop their skills. But then we also, the other part of the design element is tool set. What we come to mean by tool set is what collaborative methodology or framework are we going to use to look at this problem? And the other element of the design is systemic challenge. So every time we do a two-day workshop with the leaders, there'll be a systemic challenge that has been identified them as something that needs to be addressed.
Very interesting. Yeah.
So we will use a collaborative methodology, and to be clear, that would be something like appreciative inquiry, or design thinking, or collaboratories. I find it difficult saying that word, collaboratories, which is something a term I came across, and I kind of designed and developed a process for bringing groups together to work on specific issues. And most of the program, people are working in their specific place. But for the last modules, we bring both cohorts together. So for the final, so the place-based leadership development program happens over a number of months. There's an induction. There's a series of modules which are 2-day workshops. So that's 4 2-day workshops. And then the last two modules, modules 9 and 10, isn't 2 days, it's 3 days. But there we're bringing in the two cohorts together to work together. So it's kind of like interplace. So we move from intraplace to interplace, and that can be very challenging, but also it's a very worthwhile learning experience. And all the time we are checking in with people, we are emphasizing the importance of the tenets of practice, the behaviors, how we work, and the relationship is just fundamental.
Yeah. And what then are the challenges of effectively implementing the model? I suppose they're relational as well, are they?
Yeah, they're very much relational, and they're very much, as a facilitator, it's learning to listen and step back. It's being challenging in a polite way.
Yeah.
But it's also, it also gets quite complex. And I guess you also have to check in with yourself, and you have to practice what you preach. So there's a lot of time spent making sure that, for example, if we deliver workshops in 2 different places, the same modules in 2 different places, we're having a review meeting at the end of those workshops with the client and with the lead people. We will have a workshop, we will have a meeting, and we'll say, I will say, what was your experience of it? And my important thing there is that first I'm listening. And yes, I will share my perspective, but I really need to understand and listen what's their perspective, how things are happening, what's working, what's not working. Are people up to speed? How can we change? And then we might change. We will adjust and change what we deliver and how we deliver for the next workshop.
Do people, sorry, Rob, do people sometimes feel quite vulnerable in this process?
Totally. I mean, you get feedback like, it's not nice sharing my areas for development. They do feel vulnerable, But what we try and do is what we're interested in is the process of learning and what they get from the activities. So for example, one of the activities we do very early on in modules 1 and 2 is storytelling.
Oh, nice.
So storytelling is very much linked to values and behaviors. And we talk about storytelling. And what I do as well is I also, as a principal, I also don't ask anybody to do what I wouldn't do myself.
Sure.
So when we do the storytelling exercise, they're doing it in pairs, and we give them a structure. You know, it's like if your life was a book, what would the chapters be? So people get time to write down individually what those chapters would be, and they share them with each other. But before that process happens, I stand up and I say, well, part of my life history is this. And I stand there and I say, in as short a time as possible, I say, well, the chapters for some of my early life are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then when people work together, they are working one-to-one. And what we don't ask them to do is share any elements of their story in plenary. What we're asking them to do is in their pairs only share what they want to share.
Sure.
And how we do it is there's a narrator and a listener, and then they swap roles. So the narrator tells their story and the listener listens again without interrupting, without asking any questions. And then the listener feeds back to the narrator at the end. These are the values I heard.
Oh,
these are the values that I heard came out of your story. So it's not a judgment. It's just about what the values I heard. And then they swap roles. And when we come back in plenary, what we're asking people is, what was that experience like? So we're inviting people. Yeah. So we're inviting people to share what the experience was. I felt vulnerable, but I felt elated. I didn't realize I'd done so much. Now I know some of the things that now I understand why sometimes I self-sabotage. I understand more my patterns. The values are really important to me. I'm really pleased I got these values out. Oh, it was difficult. So people share what the exercise was like and the process was like and how they feel. So we talk very much as well about your senses, and we talk about being and how you feel and how you are. And this is very different from saying, what's your story?
Yeah, but it's also, I mean, as a former public servant, and even, you know, with your academic hat, talking about feelings is not something that, in particular, a lot of men in high levels do.
No, it's something that it's something that we as men traditionally do not do. So,
and it is so important, isn't it? Because it
massively important. Yeah, massively important. And we are key as well that we are using strength-based approaches. And when I say strength-based, I always get a list. But anyway, strength-based approaches. I was doing a recording recently for the Royal College of Surgeons, and I was doing a couple of lectures, and in the studio I couldn't say strength-based. Had to go for a walk for
not
10
alone,
minutes.
Rob. Not alone.
So precisely, Jane, that idea of working with relationships is so fundamental, and I personally think that's how we get connection as well. And we do share things like we will share with people resources as well, like, you know, listen to this podcast by Brené Brown about vulnerability and why it's important.
Nice.
So we try and also make sure that as much as possible people feel confident and safe, and also the group connection identity also builds safety. But we do also talk about discomfort. So we do talk about things like we do talk about innovation, and we say, well, innovation often comes from conflict. And we talk about the need to manage conflict, and it's how we respond to conflict that's important. And through collaboration, there'll always be tensions, and there'll always be conflict. And we talk about how we become comfortable with the uncomfortable.
I love that concept too.
Yeah, so a lot of the areas that we talk about in Kenya are very visceral. They're very you know, some people in the room have been affected by them. They're very.
There's wounds there somewhere.
Yeah, there's wounds. there's, you know, there was one time was a person who was talking to the police, and his previous experience of the police, not those police in the room, but previous experience of the police, was actually being assaulted by the police.
Yeah.
So how we talk about this and how we talk and is really important, but being sensitive to that, I'm also only there to facilitate conversations and discussions and enabler. I'm an enabler. For me, I don't think I'm that important. It's more about how people connect and enabling people to connect, and, you know, truly believe in things like people are experts in their own lived experience. And that's the starting point.
Yeah.
So it's coming into the room and starting with where people are and not where people think they are. So when we use academic theory, for example, and content, we're doing that to underpin what people's experience has or support their thinking, not the other way around.
Sure.
So we try and understand,
make it relevant.
Make it relevant and start from where people are. So that kind of way of connecting and way of being is, we kind of really feel it's important that we show these practices as facilitators, but also our groups are. And the groups actually, if they work really well, they also actually become a home for people to work with each other beyond the life of the program.
Yeah.
Because
which is a brilliant success, actually, of that.
Yeah, it's totally. And that's why we kind of emphasize how we arrive, how we come into the room. We explain the behaviors we expect to see from each other, and that we talk to the groups about how they want to work together, but then we introduce the tenets of practice. So it's the way, so we start from where the group are.
Yeah.
And the tenets of practice aren't rocket science. They are things that you would, it's about mutual accountability. But what we find in the most effective,
I imagine respect is
it's kind of, but what we find, so one of them is responsibility and accountability. And those are two sides of the same coin. But what we find in the more effective groups is actually they self-regulate.
Yeah.
So if a person is on their phone and not being there,
someone will
politely tell them, will politely tell them, you need to, it's about being here, you need to be here. And I think that's so important, because that builds the confidence, that builds the confidentiality, that builds, that builds very much, that builds the way of working and the way of being.
Yeah.
And if we don't have that, if we don't have that relational element, going back to relationships, it just won't work. Sure. Yes, there might be challenges. The same with the co-facilitator development program. I have to learn to listen to feedback from co-facilitators. They learn to listen to feedback to me. And in the co-facilitator development program, it's really interesting, because the pairs actually feedback, the group feedback to the pair. And then at some point on one of the workshops, a pair feeds back to another pair. And then the individuals feedback to each other about what's the tenet of practice I'm working with? What do you want? I'm going to try out this tenet of practice because I need to develop that. Can you observe me when we're working together? And can you tell me
what's working and
what's not working? And what's really interesting is they call each other out, because we also say for the facilitators, these are the areas of feedback. These are the areas of feedback, and we say things like, if you say something like, oh, what was that like? It was good. So if you tell me I was good, that doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't tell me whether I was really good, what was good, or do you mean it was good because you don't want to tell me, or was it really awful?
Bland.
So we try and ensure that we are giving feedback that is clear and meaningful and qualified, and and we say specific as possible. I thought I was going to have a list there with that word. So these should also say, I suppose, really important, we've published a number of papers. The Kenyan work, we've also done work in Guatemala, we've also done work in Uganda, and now the work in Ireland, and we're carrying on with the research.
Yeah.
Because we think it's really important that the tenets of practice come from research, they come from practice. So research informs practice and practice informs research.
Yeah. And I suppose as well, if things tally from one location to the next, then it solidifies the evidence base.
Yeah, it does. And I think that's the beauty of the way we've managed to work, is that it really works well when we're working with at least two places. Because this enables us to bring the places together at the end, like for the final workshops of the program, but also it kind of enables us to kind of try something out in one place and then try it in another. And you know, we have to be honest as well where things don't always work. We have to listen to people's feedback. And I think that kind of iterative approach of building and trying and experimenting is really important. And we use a lot of things like movement as well. Movement is really important. So
bring people into the energy,
bring people into a space. We get people to walk and talk. At the same time, we make them change direction and things like that at the same time. So it's kind of a discombobulating experience, but a bit of fun. But also we know that if people walk and talk, we know it frees them up. Their mind is freed up and people become more creative.
Yeah. So if they're a bit more like the West Wing, where they're constantly.
Yeah, totally. So, you know, we can't do that all the time, but we kind of make sure that that's, you know, that's just a really key part.
Yeah.
And we build fun into learning, but we also make sure that we're drawing out what are the key lessons. So one of the questions we ask people, for example, is if your leadership was a song, what song would it be?
Nice. Yeah.
And this kind of links back to values.
Yeah. But also probably causes a bit of laughter when people.
Oh, totally. It causes laughter. We even had some groups where they've created a playlist for the group.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they've
created that for our design thinking.
Yeah.
It was nice.
It's it's about creating that connection. But then we also say to people, if you're brave, why don't you go back to your colleagues that you work with and say, if my leadership was a song, what song would it be? And
that would tell a lot.
That would tell a lot. And I tell an anecdote, a story, which I won't tell here, but basically one leader, there was a big difference between the song she thought about and the song her very close colleague thought.
Well, there's the cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, it was in the dissonance, and she was saying to me, what does that mean? And I was saying, well, that's for you to think about.
Yeah. I've taken lots of your time, Rob, but I'm just wondering, you know, in terms of cultivating leadership among, say, residents in an area where there might be lots of crime, a lot of poverty, addiction, intergenerational unemployment over, you know, decades, and there mightn't be many visible leaders in the community. How do you go about building leadership in that type of a community?
I think my approach is to make sure that we are able to encourage people to understand that leadership isn't about authority, that's command, and leadership isn't about necessarily having a group of people you tell what to do, or about business management, you know, management. But leadership is about how you are, how you turn up, how you ask questions of others and yourself. And what we find is that when we work with these individuals, we work with people in we always do intersectoral work, intersectoral groups, and this also helps this avoids groupthink. And whilst, yes, these contexts are challenging, it's also important that people build up identify themselves as a leader. It's not unique to community leaders. Often in the health service, people in allied health professionals don't always see themselves as leaders. So it's about helping them develop their identity and recognition of all the strengths they have and all they have achieved, and that those are really relevant. Sometimes when people come to the first induction, there might be confidence issues, and it might be that one or two people decide, no, this is not for me, and maybe it's not, and maybe it's not for them. But we encourage people to realize that they're there on their own merit. They're not there because of they're not there because of they're not there they're not just sent there because they're a resident, but also they're sent there because they've applied, and they've been recognized as having the capability and the potential, and some of that potential is already there. They just need to embrace and recognize it. So it's really about taking the first two modules after the induction. We do a lot of work on leader and identity and values and behaviors, and those what I call the foundational elements, and that's about helping people recognize what being a leader is and what leadership is. And what we normally have as well is we might have, as I said, there might be some people who decide after the induction, that's not for me, but then we would hopefully replace those people with other people. And we would make sure as well that we brief people before bringing them on board, and we make sure that their experience is valued. And how do you value someone's experience? You bear witness and you're present. So for me, it's about how my experience as a resident or community leader, is my experience valued? Am I listened to? Am I in a group where there are 4 people who are talking and I'm just always having to listen all the time? If we practice the behaviors, then we can bring people together. Also, what I found as well is, this is what I found in my case studies, but also on these programs, is the group, what you're developing when the group work together is you're developing a shared lived experience. So you are actually then developing a cohort of people who support and know each other. They value each other's experience, but they bring their individual experience that is validated. We talk very much about personal truth and subjective truth, and those are really important terms. You know, your personal, 2 people will be involved in an incident and they'll have a totally different perspective depending on where they're standing, where they come from, and their background. But actually, it's both true, but it's a personal truth. And they're both equally important. And what we're doing, if we work in the right way with groups, what we're doing is creating a shared lived experience, and that also helps build confidence. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. It's very challenging, but also it's the only way we can do is start from where people are. And I think that's really important.
Thanks, Rob. And we are, anyway, regardless of where we start, we're all works in progress. You know, if I'm high status manager, I'm still not perhaps at my potential, or I might be emotionally cut off. And we can all grow through the experience.
We definitely, Jane. And we talk about, I talk about a model of the knowing, being and doing model, and talk about the being part, but I also talk about becoming. You know, we're always working towards it and in progress. So I think, in answer to your question, sure, it's about starting from where people are at and working with that. So, and I think it's really important that we start with where people are, not where we would like them to be.
Sure. Final question, Rob, and it's been so lovely chatting to you and learning more about this really interesting model of working and with place and people and leaders. How do you think policymakers could promote safe, strong, cohesive, relational communities? It's a big question.
Yeah, I think my experience in the UK has been that there's been a lot of one of the problems the challenges in the UK public service has been there's been quite a lot of secondments where people go from local government or local areas to central government. There's little the other way around. And I think there needs to be more of that type of working. I think civil servants should have an element of their career spent in place. And I think having programs which are where people are working together, because I think it's about understanding others' perspectives first of all. I think that's the start, and that's where you build the trust, and that's where you bear witness. So I think for me, it is about having more localized approaches, but it's also about bringing it's also about enabling civil servants. It's enabling national agencies also to understand the local, and likewise as well, because I don't think it's just one way. I think the more we can get people working together, the better. And I think listening, listening is such an underused skill in leadership.
No doubt.
And I think it's about having, I think it's about programs like my program, but I think in general it's about how do we, is my career just spent stuck in Dublin? Now, Dublin's a lovely place, don't get me wrong.
It is lovely.
But I think, when was the last time I connected to a locality? When was the last time I understood the challenges of people trying to implement policies or programs? How well are the policies informed by lived experience? Where is the part in my career or in my trajectory where I go and spend time working in a community development capacity in an NGO in a local setting? Where do I, when am I connecting? And
the world's outside my little window. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that has to go both ways, especially in Ireland, where I think there's too much centralization.
Okay. Well, Dr. Rob Worrall, thank you so much for talking to me today about why relationships matter. It's been a real privilege. So
thank you.
This has been Law and Justice with me, Jane Mulcahy, and Dr. Rob Worrall. Thank you for listening. And
thank you, Jane. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.